Sorry about that. Emily, will you do that one more time?
Yeah. Yeah. So my name is Emily. I am a third-year dental student at the University of Pittsburgh School of Dental Medicine, and I'm originally from Orlando, Florida.
Thank you. And Allison.
Hey everyone, my name is Allison Temple. I am a fourth year dental student at East Carolina University. I went to undergrad in Florida at a very small school called Florida Southern College, got my degree in biology, and then I ended up getting my master's in public health from Liberty University. And then got accepted into ECU. I applied multiple times, so if anyone has any questions about that too, I'm happy to answer them. And I am also on an Army scholarship for school. So also happy to answer any questions about that, but excited to get to know y'all and answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Allison and Emily. And just as a heads up, we will have time at the end of the panel discussion before we go into the breakout rooms for some Q&A around, dental school interviews specifically. So please put those questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring it and we can ask those at the end. So without further ado, let's get started. So can you talk to us about, the interview formats you experienced during your dental school interviews so that probably the attendees on here have heard there are multiple interview formats. You're not going to necessarily see all of them, but the one-on-one, the panel, the group, the multiple mini interview MMI, which seems to be the really popular one now. Could you guys talk a little bit about, the ones that you experienced in all of your dental school interviews, not necessarily the one that you ended up, the school that you ended up going to? Emily, we'll start with you.
So I think I had all of them. Yeah, so MMI was interesting. They do kind of ethical scenarios. At one of my schools, they actually had standardized patients as part of the interviews, and you would have a moderator watching. They would sit in. Also, we applied during COVID, so a lot of our interviews, all but two of mine were on Zoom. So there was a moderator in the room, that was one of the admissions people, and then you kind of went with a standardized patient as a case as part of the interview, which was the most interesting. For standard interviews, it's pretty nice because you get to talk to the faculty, ask questions and stuff like that. Some panel interviews can be intimidating when you're one person with multiple faculty, but it's nice to get opinions from different people when you're asking your questions. But sometimes some people are just there to view and they don't communicate. You're only really speaking to one person. Just be yourself and everything will happen the way it's supposed to be. But the best way to prepare for interviews, I think that's a different question. I'll save that for later.
You're getting ahead of yourself, Emily. Yeah, but I think the MMI, and Allison, maybe you can talk a little bit about that too, but it seems to me from when I talk to students, that seems to be the most intimidating one, the one that people don't, and it sounds a little intimidating when you talk about it. So curious, Allison, if you had a similar experience and if you encountered the MMI and other ones too.
Sorry, I was
I muted.
muted.
I muted you by mistake. I'm muting.
But so I had a similar experience. So the first time I applied to dental school, I did get one interview that was in person. And then just like Emily said, we were the odd ones who had the COVID interview. So most of ours were on Zoom, which again, I feel like a lot of us are used to nowadays, but most dental school interviews are going to be in person. And so I experienced everything from one-on-one, two-on-one, group setting with sometimes they don't like to call it a group interview, but usually there's group situations that you get put in. And let me just say, everything that you experience the day of your interview is probably a part of the interview. And so if you are just sitting in with your group of other interviewees, they're kind of taking note of how you interact with other students, how you interact with faculty and things like that. So just treat the whole day like an interview because you don't know when they're going to be watching and you could impress them by going out of your way and, thanking staff or just communicate the way that you communicate with the other students that are there. But I'll say too, usually the one-on-one interviews, again, it's different for each school. I had interviews at Maryland and East Carolina University were the two schools, or I applied to three schools the third time and got interviews at two of them. But both of those, the interviews were around 20 minutes long. I also experienced a case study situation where they claim they're not watching you, but they absolutely are. And so we had like a case study that me and a couple of the other interviewees had to do, and you could see that the camera in our room was on. And I was like, okay, they're definitely watching us, even though they said it didn't count towards the interview. Again, you just never know. And so just kind of be on your A game throughout that whole day, and just, again, like Emily said, be yourself. But it's an exciting time, and I feel like very quickly you get your nerves out. I know at East Carolina University, we start the day with a student interview, and so that kind of set the tone for the rest of the day. And it was nice to just have a normal conversation with another student, get your nerves out, and then you were prepared for the rest of the time. So I think a lot of schools try to do that, and you're just as much interviewing them as they're interviewing you. So yeah.
And we will get into that question a little later, so good segue. Well, thank you. So, what steps or resources did you use to prepare for the various interview formats? So I assume that you didn't really know when you were, walking onto the campus for the first time, which interviews you were going to be exposed to, or maybe you did. You can talk about that. I don't know how much communication happens before the actual interview day, but so how did you prepare for really any kind of interview scenario that you would be faced? Allison, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so I am very much a proponent, and I do this now with pre-dental students, but of mock interviews. So definitely try to do a mock interview of sorts, whether that's with an advisor, with a current dental student, someone from ADEA, ASDA, anything like that. ADEA, as well as the American Student Dental Association, they have great resources too. So I know that I was watching webinars on interview tips, things like that. And so definitely social media is huge nowadays. So be on the lookout, follow them on Instagram and anything that they post. We do a lot with pre-dental students. ADEA, obviously, as you all are here today, and ASDA as well. So just be on the lookout for different things like that. But I cannot stress a mock interview enough. I think that that's a great way to, because most of the questions, especially the ones that I'm asking students when I do a mock interview, are questions that I had. And so we're usually asking questions that are most likely going to be asked again. So again, it's a good way to kind of get a little sneak peek of what the interview process might be like and what questions you might be asked.
And I'll just, before we get to Emily, follow up on that. Would you suggest asking for feedback from the person you're doing the interview with about tips on how you can maybe, even if it's not answer it differently, but just how you phrase things, or I mean, is that part of the process too?
Definitely. And something that, so when I was applying to dental school, I had an amazing advisor who she started actually my last year of undergrad. And she just came in guns blazing and was like, we're going to make you all successful. So she actually recorded me. We did a mock interview and she set up a camera and recorded me just so I could see my body language. I could listen to my tone of voice, see if I was taking pauses. It was incredibly awkward watching back, but I was very appreciative that we had that experience because I felt like it made me a better interviewee or interviewer down the road. But yeah, definitely.
Great, thanks. And Emily, anything else out there? I'm sure there are other things other than the mock interview, but clearly that's an important resource.
Yeah, I think Student Doctor Network also people post it can be very, very toxic while you're in the cycle to look at Student Doctor Network and see people getting interviews and acceptances and stuff. But if you can look past that, sometimes people post questions that are asked, especially schools that ask like very particular questions that may be like out of the box, like something like a case presentation or a standardized patient as part of the interview, which might throw you off. Something to add, you said that you may not know the format. Schools are very, very open about it. So when you get invited to an interview, they usually send you a PDF or an email with the day-to-day schedule. So you'll know if you have two 20-minute interviews, one hour long interview. I had one interview at Penn, and the only question from the dean was, "What questions do you have for me?" And that was the start of a 1 hour long interview. So you have to come prepared with questions because we were able to fill it in with the questions I had and discussions that came from that. So be prepared for everything. But again, we were in the COVID year. So my friends were all on the cycle. I had 3 friends applying to medical school. I was applying to dental school. So all 4 of us would log into Zoom once a week, and we all mock interviewed each other. And we would look up on Reddit or SDN, um, past questions that were asked for whatever program we were interviewing at that week, and we would just, again, record it because that's super, super helpful. You can see things like if you're biting your lip, if you're saying too much, if you're not looking at the camera. But like she said, most interviews are in person now, but you want to feel comfortable looking at somebody in the eyes and not like spacing out and things like that. So recording yourself is super beneficial. But the more mock interviews you do or you practice with a partner, somebody else, the more comfortable you'll feel when you get asked the questions. And something as basic as tell me about yourself. You want to get that down where it's super smooth. You're not stumbling, you're not getting to your high school or college and then you're like, but I was born here and growing up I did this. You want that to be a really smooth why you want to be a dentist, why that school. I feel like those are the 3 big questions that you'll get asked at every program. So just have those down very well. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, even just in in any kind of professional setting, talking about your elevator pitch or 30 to 60-second elevator pitch, of who you are and, why you want to be there. So I think that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, that's some of that stuff is basic, but good to remind attendees here. So great.
Um, can I
Oh,
add
go ahead.
something? Something that I forgot to talk about in the types of interviews. LECOM is the only school that I know that does this, but group interviews where it's a group of students repeat or like interviewing at the same time, I don't think is something that we talked about. So it will be 1 or 2 faculty members, and it's a group of 6 to 8 students that are all interviewees, and you'll all get interviewed together. And so the tip for that is, um, take turns being the first one to speak. You don't want to always be the first one to answer every question and like make everything about yourself, but you always don't want to be the last one where they have to call on you. Kind of bounce things because they're trying to see. They do PBL learning there. So they want to make sure you can work well as a group. Another school did something like Allison mentioned where they did a case that you guys worked on as a group together as part of the interview and they're watching you. So you just want to show that you can work with other people. So you would say like, oh, Allison, that's a great point. So what my answer to this is, and things like that, smile, respond, things like that to show them that you're friendly. The 3 questions. Oh, perfect. Somebody answered.
Paying attention. I love it. Yeah. And again, this will be recorded so you can look back on it too. But yeah, tell me about yourself, why dentistry and why this school. Perfect. Great. So we're talking a lot about, interview format and what kind of questions might be asked, but what information should students know ahead of time before walking into the interview, such as current trends? Should you be up on some of the current trends in dentistry? Facts about the dental school. How much of that information should you know? Obviously, you need to do your research on the website, but how much of that really is going to be factored into some of the questions perhaps. And what was the other culture, how much should you read up on the culture of the school, beforehand, before you actually experience it in person. Emily, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I think anything on the website you should have an idea about because that's as basic as your research could come. So what I would do is for in-person interviews, have a portfolio, a little portfolio where you can take notes and you can come in with those notes there so you can review it like whenever you do have a break on the interview day, like right before you go into the actual interview. But bullet points, what kind of volunteering? You don't want to ask, like at Pitt, it's required to do volunteering your first and second year, and then you have clinical volunteering third and fourth year. So you wouldn't want to ask, like, do your students volunteer? Because it's on the website that there's this program established for it. But you can elevate the question where you could still ask about it, but say, as a part of ACT ARCO, what types of community service do your students do? So that shows that you looked into the program and you know that the program is offered, but you're asking more about it. So they know you really care about the school. Um, you should know what residency programs they have, because again, those are ways that you can ask better questions. You don't want to say, am I going to be doing like third molar extractions under sedation as a 3rd-year student? If they have an oral surgery department, like that's definitely going to oral surgery. And things like that. The class size, maybe, research, if the school is big on research, maybe have an idea of what kind of research projects that they have going on. And some things about the city, because they will ask you like, I'm from Florida. I was interviewing all over the country, and you always have to sell it. It's either like, I want to stay home close to family, or if it's an out-of-state interview, like, I really want to live in Colorado. Oh my gosh, it's been my dream to live here. So know some things about the city. I really want to go hiking. I really want to see snow, whatever it is. Something that's a sell point of that city as well.
Yeah, that's a great thing. I didn't even think about that. That's a great thought. Thank you. Allison, anything to add?
Not too much. I feel like Emily really nailed it on a lot of those. I will stress too, or put extra emphasis on, know the mission and vision statement of the school, because that's something that each school is very proud of, and something that they might not always ask you, but they might throw that in there just to see how prepared you are. And if the school really is a school that you want to go to, that's something that they want you to be familiar with. Usually they're relatively short. You could just remember a couple key things. Like, I couldn't tell you ECUs off the top of my head. I just know they're big on serving the underserved and leadership, or preparing leaders, developing leaders, I think is what it is. So even in my 4th year of dental school, I don't know it by heart, but just know some key like tidbits about it. Dental trends, I was asked a couple questions, and I'll get into that a little bit later too, but I was asked specifically about one state that I was interviewing in and how it compared to the rest of the US. And I was not prepared for that at all. So I just, threw something out there and answered to the best of my ability. Um, but again, other than that, sometimes it's good to know, or it could impress them if you know a little bit about like new technology in dentistry, or any advocacy issues that impact dental students and dentists. So those are just some little things. Maybe if you have the chance, go on like the ADA website or ASDA even, and you can find different articles about different issues in dentistry and things like that. So that's something that I did. You don't have to do, but it's just extra information to have in your back pocket.
I think the more prepared, the better, it sounds like. Emily, did you have something?
Yeah. Also, be careful with like asking about certain things, I would say, because then it's always awkward if you're like, are you guys doing some like really high tech, like 3D printing dentures, which very few schools are doing right now? And then they say no, and then it's just awkward because you just like left it on like a sour note, something that they're not offering. So they're like, oh, maybe they really wanted that and they wouldn't be willing to come here. So try to keep it as like positive questions because you never want to like just leave on a, oh no, we're not offering that type of thing. But yeah.
Yeah, if you're not sure if they're offering it, maybe don't ask it. So yeah, no, that's great. That's great feedback. And because I do work for ADEA, and a shameless plug here is, there's always the ADEA Official Guide to Dental Schools and the ADEA Dental School Explorer. So, there's a minimal cost to those resources, but you get access to the Dental School Explorer for a year, and just, talking about class size. And I think Emily, you were the one who was talking about that class size, and whether there's a research focus, and some of the other key components of the, kind of class profile and school profile are listed, in the Dental School Explorer. It's updated every year, so it's very up to date, and almost all the schools, update their information. So, definitely take the opportunity to do that. It's $35 for a year access. So I really recommend that if you haven't done it yet. Again, especially for the schools that you're interviewing with, if you haven't taken a look yet, it just gives you a little bit of information that potentially isn't available on their public website, or might be harder to find on the website. It's very easy to find in the Dental School Explorer. So anyway, shameless plug, I had to do it, but definitely look into it if you haven't. Well, that's great. So, we talked about kind of the research component, the interview style, or the interview formats, but what can students do ahead of time to prepare for the day of experience? So not necessarily interview formats, but attire. So most people probably know, but let's talk about it. How much time you're going to spend on campus for the interview. Some people, it sounds like they're shorter interviews. Sometimes it's a whole day, or it's just a half a day. So each school is probably a little bit different, but what can you kind of expect, and what can you expect from the culture? Are you did you have the experience of getting to walk around with students and tour the clinic, or did you not do that? So just giving kind of a little bit of insight into that would be great. Allison, you want to start?
Yeah, so I have my moments where I definitely think that what you wear is part of your first impression. And sometimes it is nice to stand out, sometimes it's not. When it comes to a dental school interview, I would definitely lean towards being more conservatively dressed because I can say from personal experience, being a student interviewer at my school, a lot of the faculty will talk about what you are wearing. And if you are wearing something that it might be the cutest, like hip with the times outfit, but for an interview, they'll start talking. And so you don't want to be that person. Sometimes you stand out in a great way and sometimes not so good. So just be cognizant of that. Like the dental school interview might not be the time to wear your hot pink or like neon yellow. Try to keep it like neutral tones in a way. Again, I'm all for standing out, but just a lot of the dental school faculty is very old school, very traditional. So just keep that in the back of your head. I would also encourage you to wear comfortable shoes. I'm not saying don't wear heels. I wore heels during my interview, but usually the interview day will consist of a tour. So just be prepared to be walking around the school. A lot of times they will also be taking you up the stairs. If there's stairs, not always will they use the elevator. So just be cognizant of that too. Again, unless, special circumstances, they will use the elevator and things like that. I would also definitely arrive probably 10 to 15 minutes early. I I was early for all of my interviews, but there was one when it was in person that I went to the wrong, or I went to the right address, but I went to the wrong floor. And so fortunately, another student found me and was like, "Are you interviewing today?" And so I had like a minute to make it to where I was supposed to be. But again, if I hadn't been there early, I would have probably just been in the wrong location. So just be a little bit early. I would also expect to be there at least half a day. So if you're a breakfast eater, definitely eat breakfast. If it goes a little bit or sometimes they have a working lunch, or they'll do like a student panel or something like that during lunch. So usually if it goes relatively long, they will give you lunch or something to eat. But again, just be prepared to be there for at least half a day.
Thank you. Emily, anything to add to that?
No, that was perfect. Yeah, I think most of them are a full day. Whether the interview is like a short, like 1 hour or like 20 minutes or 1 hour, they fill it in with like tours and student panels and faculty things. So be prepared for a full day.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good comment, Allison, about just really giving yourself enough time, because if you've never been on the campus, which probably is true, you might end up, it's confusing, so you might end up on the wrong floor. So, always give yourself enough time to get lost. It sounds like a terrible thing to say, but prepare to get lost. So that's great. And I think this is probably, Allison, what you were referring to earlier, but can you talk to us a little bit about, some pieces of information that admissions officers or your interviewers kind of brought up during your interviews that you weren't prepared for? You kind of alluded to that, Allison, before. So, what were some of the surprising things that came up, even if wasn't necessarily you weren't prepared for, but you were surprised that it came up? You can take either angle. Emily, we'll start with you on that one. Oh, you're muted.
I think make sure you know your application very well. You don't know how much time the interviewer has with your application. So they may just flip to a page and you should be able to talk about anything that's on your application confidently. Um, and yeah, they can ask you. I think the case presentations and things like that are like the trickiest things. One of my the standardized patient, like I said, first the pen interview where they were just like, what questions do you have for me to begin an hour-long interview? That threw me off guard. But then one of my standardized patient interviews, it was a little old lady that had a bruise on her face, so she was obviously dealing with abuse, and I had to handle that and ask all the right questions. And you're not trained to do that as a pre-dental student. All we take is science classes. So it's about navigating, recognizing the signs of abuse, getting her to admit it, even though she didn't want to report to the police, and I had to lie and be like, I'm not going to report to the police. And then knowing that a dentist is a mandated reporter, so then flipping the switch and saying, I have to report this to the police. Um, so things like that they don't teach you, but if you don't know that dentists are mandated reporters, you might miss it and be like, I'm gonna let this slide and just move forward with the dental appointment. So that caught me off guard, but I knew that, so I was okay. Another really weird question I had was, what's the worst math class and your favorite class you took in high school? So they can pull really weird things. And sometimes it's not even about what the answer is, it's about how you explain it or reason it. So just have a good reason for whatever it is you're answering, I think.
Thank you. How about you, Allison?
I feel like Emily touched on a lot, some that I totally forgot about too. One of the things when she was saying know your application, I obviously whatever you put on your application, you probably are able to talk about. But I ended up getting asked about, I used to teach cycling classes, and somebody asked me about that. And I was like, that was a job I had a couple years ago, and you're asking me about that of all things. So again, everything that you put in your application is fair game. One of the harder questions that I was asked that fortunately I was able to talk about was a time that I was faced with adversity. And so that probably, again, that could be easy for a lot, but it was just the way to handle it, to not seem any type of way to who's asking you that question too. So for questions that you don't necessarily have maybe an answer or like a personal story, you could always think about like a friend that you helped go through a time of adversity or something like that. So just I would encourage you to always try and have an answer and don't just say, like, I'm sorry, I don't know. Try to come up with something to the best of your ability. Again, even if it's somebody else's story, if you were able to be a part of it in some way or help out, I would definitely encourage you to speak on that. And again, like I touched on a little bit earlier, I got asked about the dental trends in North Carolina compared to the US. And again, my school is very much about serving the underserved. So I think what they like now being a student in my fourth year, I think what they were looking for in that was that North Carolina at the time was ranked, or when our school was established, we were ranked 47 out of 50 states for our oral health care disparity. And so obviously in North Carolina, that's something that they are very passionate about. And so they just wanted to know, like, hey, North Carolina's at the bottom. Here's what we're doing to increase that or improve oral health care disparities and things like that. So that I think in hindsight is what they wanted. But during my interview, that is probably not what I said. So just again, be aware of some of the things that are going on, aware of, I mean, I'm not saying you have to go research like HIPAA or any oral health care disparity in the state that you're interviewing at, but just have an idea of how you could elaborate on one of those tougher questions.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. I mean, obviously you did okay because you're at ECU. So, I think that's okay to not always get the right, what you feel is the right answer. And one thing I just want to bring up, I think it's okay too, and please back me up or don't back me up. It's okay to take a moment and pause when somebody asks a question that you're not 100%, you're thrown off. I think they're looking for that too. I mean, that's in any kind of interview situation. I mean, they're asked questions to kind of throw you off or see how you react in that situation. So just take a moment to pause, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. So just wanted to throw that out there too. Great. So we're two more questions left before we have time for Q&A. So, what are 2 or 3 important questions that prospective students should ask their interviewers during the interview process? So we talked about this, I kind of alluded to this before, is you are being interviewed, but you're interviewing as much as you're being interviewed, right? So what are, in your opinion, kind of the 2 or 3 questions that are important to ask? Allison, we'll start with you.
Yeah, again, if there's something that really matters to you, like if you, I would maybe try to stick with general dentistry, but if you plan on specializing, you could always ask about like how the school might prepare you for that. But I would definitely gear more towards sticking towards general because that's what dental school is training you to be. But some other questions that I felt like were important were something that I mean, it's not necessarily the greatest question, but something that I asked a lot of the schools that I interviewed at were, is there anything that you would change about the school? And so just that's a way for them to be a little bit transparent with you. Usually some schools will actually answer that, some may not. So take with that what you will. Another question that I like to ask was, what are some areas that students excel at and what are some areas that they're weaker at? For me, I was definitely more nervous about the didactic portion, the tests, the exams, where I was super excited and I felt like I was going to have really good hand skills in clinic and things like that. So that was something that I just wanted to know, like, will I be kind of with everybody else? Will I be a little bit weaker in an area that not everybody else is? Things like that. Another thing I would encourage you all to do, if you do get a little document or a little handout that has who is interviewing you, like if it has specific faculty, not every school does this, ECU does this. I researched them beforehand. And if there's a faculty that does research in an area that you're interested in, or that you have done research in yourself, that is the perfect time to kind of elaborate maybe on something that they're not going to ask you about, but also pique their interest and ask them a little bit about what research they do, or if they went to another dental school or something, you could ask them how it compares, things like that. So just take the time to research who your interviewer is if you have access to that.
Yeah, those are great questions, Allison. Thanks. Emily, do you have any additional questions you'd ask?
Um, I think things tie. I really like that you brought up looking. I forgot that some programs did tell you who your interviewer was. So it's really nice when you know information about them, because I had one where I was asking her clinical questions and she was like, I'm a research faculty. I don't know what goes on in clinics. So you want to have questions for anything. But what was I gonna say? Oh, things tied to like what you really care about. So if your application shows you're really heavy into research, like make it tied to something. Like you don't want to have like you didn't do any research in undergrad and all of a sudden like, you're like gung ho about like, but I really want to start on this very complicated research process. Um, so things that like your application like makes sense with you as a person and everything with how you're presenting. But I think you covered the really good questions. I'm gonna insert in the chat a picture of some questions, like just general questions. And I used to just pick some of them that applied to each of the schools, but they're just good questions to ask schools.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You're so good, Emma. I'm seeing all these questions are being answered. I don't even have to worry about it. So thank you. Well, I really appreciate it. So, we've kind of come to the last question before Q&A, which we might not have Q&A because Emily and Allison have answered all the questions. But, what is one final piece of advice you would share, with our prospective applicants here on the call about preparing for the dental school interview? Maybe that you have touched on already, but you want to, emphasize again, or maybe something we haven't talked about. So Emily, do you want to just give one final piece of advice?
Sorry, I was reading the chat.
That's okay.
Go to Allison first. Let me think.
Okay. Allison, you're up.
So if I were to give y'all any like last minute piece of advice, it would be to stay true to yourself. Do not over prepare in a way, because if you over prepare, I feel like you come off a little less genuine. And so definitely stay true to yourself. Be as confident as you can be. Again, you are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you. If you have student interviews, we are nervous too, I promise you. And so it's not just you. Everyone's a little bit nervous, on edge, but it's just a really good time for us to get to know you, you to get to know us, things like that. So again, just be yourself and it'll be a good day, a long day, but a good day.
That's great. Thanks. Emily, how about you?
Um, I feel like that was really good advice, and I can't top that. Smile a lot. Sometimes you see people and they're just asking questions and they're like this, like very serious. I feel like a smile goes a long way, especially in dentistry.
Yeah, that's fair. I think when you're nervous, you kind of don't realize what you're doing. I think the mock interviews kind of help with that too, coming full circle. So, just think about stuff like that and look excited to be there, even if you're super nervous, right? Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, you guys have been wonderful. Thank you so much for answering all of our questions. And so I'm gonna actually do stop the recording.